Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Create and Consume, a podcast about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. Today, I am recording episode 52 of Create and Consume, which, if you're doing the math of a weekly podcast in your head, means it's officially been one full year since I released my very first episode. I have absolutely loved this journey of becoming a podcaster, and I've certainly learned quite a lot along the way. So today I wanted to take some time to reflect on my first year of podcasting. I also recently got a podcast audit done by someone who's been doing this way longer than I have. So I'll tell you all about that later on. And I'm also going to reveal my top episodes from my first year of doing this. And be sure to listen through all the way to the end because I am going to be doing a little giveaway to all you listeners as a thank you for being here. Before we get into the topic of today's episode, let's do a little create and consume. So, as far as what I've been creating this past week, I went to a bunch of events with YouTube last week, which is quite honestly a dream come true for me. You guys know I am a YouTube girl through and through. So, on my Instagram account, I did do a little mini vlog recap of an entire day I spent with the YouTube shopping team that was so incredible. And I also shared kind of like a carousel style recap post. I'm trying to like make my content go a little longer and give it a little bit more mileage. So I will link both in the show notes if you want to check them out. I kind of tried to do like what would be the Instagram carousel version of the reel. And I've been really enjoying adding a little bit of extra text to my carousel posts and making them feel a bit more interactive and fun. So I'm really proud of both of those pieces of content. And then, as far as what I've been consuming this past week, it was Mother's Day, and we went to New Jersey to spend time with both Andrew's mom and then my mom. And on Sunday, my mom had an incredible meal ready to go for us, which was so kind of her considering it was Mother's Day. But one of the things that I enjoyed the most is that she did this little kind of like a bruschetta appetizer, but she also made it with this whipped ricotta. Picture toasted garlicky bread with whipped ricotta cheese on top, just like the lightest, fluffiest, airiest thing you could possibly imagine. Followed by some cute little cherry tomatoes, salt and pepper, flaky sea salt, and fresh basil from the garden. Like, we are living our best Ina Garten life, are we not? It was genuinely so good. I will ask her if she has a recipe for at least the whipped ricotta or if she has a recipe for the whole thing. And maybe I can link that in the show notes in case anyone's looking for a delightful summer appetizer. With that being said, let's get into today's episode. And I wanted to see if I could quickly play a clip from episode 1 of the podcast. So let's go ahead and give that a listen. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Create and Consume, a new podcast where we talk about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. Today's episode will introduce this new creative project of mine, and I'll also share more about why I chose to start a podcast, how I came up with the name, and how this space will be different from some of the other places that I currently create content online. All right, that was fun to give a little listen to. Aside from kind of a choppy edit, which I think I've gotten much better at, and we'll talk about the process of editing today, I think that sounded pretty much like how I sound on all other episodes. Again, I think because I've been creating various different types of content for so long, I was kind of used to the idea of an audio first format, but I just hadn't kind of formalized it ever. I mean, honestly, well, Tanisha and I were hosting Clubhouse rooms from I want to say like I want to say beginning of 2021 all the way up through the end of 2023. We were there like every single week for 2 years. And in the beginning it was just crazy because obviously we were all, locked down and there wasn't much else to do. So we basically had like a daily check in that was like Monday through Friday in the very beginning. And that was also when Kaylee and Carly were kind of also hosting the podcast. Or see, I'm calling it the podcast, the Clubhouse rooms. And that was just such a fun time to like really dive in. I remember just connecting and meeting with so many people during that time. And then it got to the point where I believe we reduced rooms first to 3 times a week when, the world reopened and life started happening again. And then we got down to weekly rooms within the last year, I want to say, which was still pretty good. I mean, it was essentially the podcast format where we were able to talk to one another and it was able to just like happen audio only right there in the moment. But what I did love about Clubhouse and what I do kind of miss a little bit about it now that I'm in the podcast world is the fact that people could like jump into the conversation. On Clubhouse, there was the raise hand feature. So if I'm yapping away about something and you have like a thought or a comment or something you wish you could like jump in and mention, that was my favorite part about Clubhouse for sure, because it just got so interactive and it was so great to hear from so many different people who I never would have like talked to otherwise. I think that so much of content is a one-way conversation where like one person is speaking and another is consuming or listening, but I just loved the interactiveness and the back and forth. And actually, this is not in my outline whatsoever, but I did just want to mention it because last week at these YouTube events, because my YouTube content used to be a lot more tailored specifically just to other content creators, I actually ended up meeting quite a few of my subscribers at these events last week, and talking to them one on one was so amazing. And honestly, I would say a mood booster and something that definitely helped my confidence, meeting people and talking to them one on one in person, because it just is a reminder that when you see numbers, like when you see, oh, 300 people liked this thing, 1,000 people watched this thing, you know, putting bots aside for the moment, obviously bots exist, but like those are real people. And every single subscriber who I met last week was like, oh my God, you are so cool. So anyway, that being said, I do love to hear from you guys. And if there is, ever feedback or an episode request or something that you want to say back to me, please feel free to reach out through any of the channels available. So just to reiterate them, because I know it's been a while probably since I've mentioned them all, not at the end of an episode, you can always reach out to me via email. The email is createandconsumepodcast@gmail.com. You can also send me a DM on Instagram or leave a comment on Instagram and TikTok. The handles for those are at Create and Consume Pod. You can also comment if you're watching on YouTube. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, I know it looks very dark in here today. I'm trying to record early because I was informed that there's going to be some work happening on my building today, starting at 8 a.m. It's 7:35 now. We'll see how far I'm able to get before, loud noises start emerging around me. You can leave comments on YouTube, you can leave comments on Spotify episodes, or you can also DM me personally. My Instagram is at Austen Tosone. I respond pretty regularly, I would say, on there. So yeah, please feel free to share your opinions and talk back. The only reason you're listening to me right now is because I bought a mic from Amazon and decided to start publishing podcast episodes. So I certainly value your opinions and insights into the show and what you want to hear from me. So, with all of that being said, let's now jump into a little just, behind the scenes, how the sausage gets made, or how the podcast gets made, rather, to walk you through what it actually takes to produce a weekly podcast. And this is one of the reasons that I held off on starting the podcast for a little while, because I really wanted to make sure that I had the time and the bandwidth to do this. And we'll talk a little more about bandwidth later on, because I think I am finally ready to bring on a little bit of help here. But essentially, the very first thing that happens is that I brainstorm or brain dump a list of topics related to all different categories of things that we talk about here on the podcast. So, as you guys know, sometimes that is more on the content creation front. So that could be anything from social media topics to how content is made to how the influencer industry works and the creator economy. That is obviously something I can and have yapped about for many hours online in the past, and that I love to continue to talk about, especially in this kind of weekly format, just because this is still such a new industry that continues to evolve and there's always more to say about it. And then kind of on the consumption front, like if we're taking create and consume, the two words that make up the podcast title with an ampersand. On the consumption side, I'm thinking about, what we are watching in terms of like TV, movies, the Met Gala, pop culture, things like that. And also then what are we consuming in terms of what are we buying in the world of fashion and beauty? What are we looking for this season? What's trending? All of those types of things. So I would say that a couple of the key themes and topics that we cover on the podcast are, fashion, beauty, a lot of seasonal content. I love doing seasonal episodes. Let me know if you guys enjoy those as well. I would love to do something summer related, given that it's already May. I can't believe we're already halfway through May. We're already like halfway through. I haven't even, no. I am going to need to do a mid year reset at some point and look at all of the goals that I set at the beginning of this year. I truly feel like I blinked and we are basically halfway through, which is so crazy. Anyway, don't mind my existential tangent just there. But also, fashion, beauty, social media, pop culture, all of these kind of different varied things. So, those are kind of the content pillars that I like to think about. As long as a topic falls within one of those, I will talk about it. And, that is broad intentionally, just because, as I mentioned, actually, if you do go back and listen to all of episode one, I really wanted this to be a space where there could be a lot more nuance, there could be a lot more storytelling and personality. And I definitely have even noticed over the years, over the single year that I've been doing the podcast. Sorry, that just sounded so, oh my God, like, oh, in all the years I've been doing this, it's like, you know what I mean, in the exact 365 days. This is why I shouldn't be allowed to record the podcast before I've had a second cup of coffee, just so you know. But actually, what I just said is kind of a perfect example of why I wanted to start the podcast, is because you get so much more personality when someone does have a long form place to share. And when someone does have an opportunity to not just like go through a bulleted list, but also use that kind of just as a jumping off point, which is what I typically do with my podcast outlines. I mean, right now, for this section, I literally just have like brainstorming, recording, editing, uploading, and I will get to all of that. But where are we? We're in the brainstorming bubble, and that is already something that I've gone off on a tangent about. But that's what I like about podcasting. So after I do my brainstorming and my outlining process, we move on to recording. And as you can tell, if you're watching on YouTube, or if you just happen to know because you've seen clips of the podcast on Instagram or TikTok before, I record right here at my desk. And I like this just because I like feeling kind of formal when I sit down to record. So I typically will have my hair and makeup done as I do today. I like being at my desk. I like having the mic in front of me. I like having the notes on the laptop next to me. And this works pretty well for me, all things considered. I know I've talked about my equipment in a previous episode, so I can just share a link down below to what podcast recording equipment I use, which is really just this microphone, a USB-C cord, Riverside, and my iPhone 15 Pro Max as the camera. Now, by this point, I would have liked to have gotten better about batching podcast episodes the same way I used to batch record 2 YouTube videos at a time. So that I would have a month's worth of content where I was able to record just 2 days out of the month and then have my 4 videos. I was kind of hoping to be able to do the same thing with the podcast. I feel like I have been really wanting to keep it weekly, at least in the beginning, to keep it really fresh and current. So you're kind of getting the most up to date version of me. For example, this episode is coming out May 15th and I'm recording it on May 13th. So I like knowing that we're right here in the week that the podcast is turning 1. So you can hear what I'm thinking about during this actual time. And it's not like I recorded this episode in March being like, I can't believe it's been a year already, when, some things can change in those 2 months. And actually, something did change. We'll get to my top episodes in a little bit. But I think in terms of making sure that I can stay consistent, and when I think about continuing to scale and even, hire to get some help on with the podcast, that might change a tiny bit going forward. But I still don't want it to be too far off. Like, I wouldn't want to be recording episodes 3 months into the future unless for some reason I was literally going to be incapable of recording for that entire time. And then when it comes to editing, I have been editing all my own episodes. I feel like, again, for the first year of doing kind of anything, whether it's content creation, running a business, doing YouTube, doing a podcast, like, it really does pay off, I think, to do everything yourself, just so that you understand how it all works and so that you can do it if for some reason, your video editor is sick and can't get the video out this week. Or maybe if you're working with a contractor and then they end up getting a different role and then, you need to kind of find someone else and do it yourself in the meantime. Like, I just think it's good to know how to do everything, but I don't think you should have to do everything forever, clearly, because I'm at the point now where I've acknowledged that I need help. However, when it comes to editing this podcast, I think I've gotten it down to be as fast as I could possibly hope for it to be. So I record in Riverside and it will save basically like the raw recording. So all of the pauses, all of the times that a dog barks in the hallway or that I start to say something and then completely lose my train of thought. And I try to keep some of my funny pauses and little things in there just to give you obviously what has mostly happening in reality, but at the same time you don't need to hear like if I sneeze or if anything weird like that is going on. So Riverside saves that whole raw edit. And then the first thing that I do is I click on a little button in Riverside when I go to edit that's called AI Producer. And then I do remove pauses. And I remove any pause that is more than 1 second. And that already will cut usually like 10 or 12 minutes off of the video. So I don't have to personally go in then and cut that dead air. I'm already getting a version of the episode where that is already gone. And that is amazing. And then one thing that I didn't really start testing until recently is that Riverside has a transcript editor on the side. Meaning, if I start to say something like 6 different times and I either, say it wrong 6 times in a row, or again, maybe it's the dog in the hallway or something who keeps barking when I'm trying to do it. I can go in and if I see the same sentence repeated 6 times, like I started to try to say it and then I couldn't, and then I tried again and again, I can literally highlight the first 5 times I tried to say the thing that I said wrong and delete it from the transcript, and it will also delete it from the video. I find that I usually do this more when I'm doing episodes that require a bit more like research that goes into them, just because maybe I start to say something and I want to rephrase it or just make sure that I'm communicating my point as clearly as possible, versus an episode like this. I hope there's going to be fewer edits needed just because we're just sitting here chatting. It's obviously very comfortable. Everything I want to say is coming from my own head. I don't necessarily need to reference facts or stats really for an episode like this. But for something like the Met Gala episode, when I'm talking about the details of someone's work and, I'm trying to name and credit different designers and things like that, I just want to like make sure I'm getting that all right and that all of that is coming through. So that episode, for me at least, like the Met Gala recap, which it would have been the episode right before this, that one kind of required a bit more editing, but the transcript editing came in handy so much for that. And then, so now at this point, I have, let's say the episode was originally an hour of me sitting here talking, which I would say is pretty standard. Then I have cut pauses. Now it's maybe down to like 50 minutes. Then I've gone in and cut some of the fluff in the transcript. Now maybe it's down to like 47 minutes. Then I download that and go into iMovie. I am still such a. Listen, there are so many sophisticated editing softwares out there, but you got to use what works for you, okay? So for me, that's still iMovie, even for YouTube as well. I'll import that into iMovie. I will change the speed to 2x speed, and I'll preserve the pitch because otherwise I'll sound like a chipmunk, which isn't really great. And then I will edit at 2x speed in iMovie. And from there, instead of listening to like 47 minutes of audio, I'm really more so listening to like 24 minutes of audio. So it still will probably take longer than exactly 24 minutes for me to cut through and edit everything and make sure that it all sounds good. But it just speeds up the editing process so much. Again, for someone who, for this whole first year, has been a one-woman show producing this podcast. Could you imagine if I did credits at the end of the show and I was like, produced by Austen Tosone, written by Austen Tosone? That would be that would be a little presumptuous of me, I think. And then there's also the whole uploading process. So when I go to upload the podcast, I upload the audio to Spotify for creators, which then puts it out on every platform. So wherever you're listening to me, if you're an Apple girl, love that for you. If you're on Amazon Music, how did you end up there? I'm genuinely curious. And then I also, of course, will upload the video episode to YouTube. And I don't do anything fancy with the video if you watch on YouTube. Actually, the intro music isn't even in my YouTube episodes just because I am trying to keep it as simple as possible. Again, make sure I get things up and when I say that they're going to be there and do it in like a timely manner. And when I do my uploading, I also need to put in show notes on Spotify and fill out the description box on YouTube, which is pretty much the show notes. Basically, making sure I include a little description of the episode that also helps for search and discovery for maybe new people to discover the podcast if I'm throwing in the right keywords that describe the episode. And also, of course, any links and things that I mentioned. So, have I mentioned links in this episode so far? Yeah, we talked about the content I created for YouTube that I'm going to link, and I'm going to see if Lynn has a recipe for the whipped ricotta. Oh, and my podcast equipment. See, so there's already 3 links. And basically, while I'm editing the episode, I will make note of any time I say something like, oh, I'll link that in the show notes in my little notes app on my laptop so that then I can go pull links for everything. And I just make note while I'm going through and editing. So brainstorming, outlining, actually recording the podcast, editing it, uploading it. Now you need to tell people that you have a podcast episode out. So then comes all of the promotion. And essentially, what I mainly try to do is promote the show through short form video clips on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts. And then I will also share when a new episode drops, pretty much always on Threads and Instagram stories. And then sometimes I'll put it on LinkedIn if I feel like it's relevant to my industry or if I think my network on LinkedIn would find it interesting. And then lastly, I also create a blog post recap for every single podcast episode. And the reason I do this is because it is kind of like a more advanced version of the show notes. It's not quite a transcript of the entire episode, but if I mention something, like if you go back to, I'm making this up, episode 39. I don't even know which episode that one is. But if there was something in episode 39 that I said, and you're like, oh my gosh, I know she was talking about the Laneige lip sleeping mask at some point. Like, what episode was that? Where can I get a link for that? Or what did she say about it? You could go to createandconsumepodcast.com and search the word Laneige, and any episode that I've mentioned Laneige in will, in theory, populate. So that I do right now entirely with ChatGPT, where I basically feed my podcast outline to ChatGPT and I say, hey, can you turn this into a recap blog post to go along with this podcast episode? And from there, I basically just go in and format, I fix anything it got wrong, and I put it up. And I'm not trying to be known for like my unique voice in writing these podcast recaps. It is literally for utility and SEO purposes so that if I mention something, you can easily find it. So I don't feel bad about using AI to write my blog posts for that reason. I would never do that on my own blog, which is Keep Calm and Chiffon. Everything that you read on there is written by me. And that is kind of where like I draw the line on AI personally. Again, also given that just as a team of one, I didn't want to like leave that hanging or have that be something that later I was going to have to outsource and say, hey, we need to catch up and do blog posts for all the past 52 episodes. Like that is just something that I have been willing to make the time to do now so that moving forward, when I do get some help on the podcast, that'll be just one more thing maybe that I can add to that person's plate. So all of that is what it takes to produce a weekly episode. And I feel like it's been a pretty consistent process throughout the last year. I think it's just been really making sure I find the time to add the podcast tasks into my weekly workflow. And as a result, maybe I've been, posting on Instagram a little less, or maybe I'm not like really active on Threads or something. So I think that there are trade-offs and that it is something you need to make and set aside a ton of time for, especially if you are doing all of the components of it yourself. And as far as my goals for the podcast, as far as some goals that I have for the podcast, I think the biggest and probably most obvious for not just me, but any podcast is really to grow listenership. So just to get more people listening, get more feedback, and just bring people more into the fold and into the conversation, especially if they're already interested in fashion, beauty, social media, all of the things that I talk about on here. And also if they are already a podcast listener. I feel like it is hard to get new listeners who do not already have kind of a couple of weekly or even daily podcasts that they turn to in their rotation, just because people's time is valuable. People consume content and information in all different ways. That is one of the main reasons why every time I do publish a podcast episode, it is also available as a YouTube video and as a blog post. I just want to give people as many options for how they can get the information as possible. I also really would love to market the podcast in more creative ways. So obviously right now I feel like I'm doing what I kind of think is the bare minimum in terms of marketing the podcast, with turning some of my podcast episodes, doing like the short form clips and distributing them on the short form platforms. That's obviously one way to do it. In the future, I think it could be so fun to have a dedicated Create and Consume email newsletter. And I've even had thoughts about kind of transferring my current shopping newsletter, which can't tell you the last time I sent that out, migrating it more into the Create and Consume umbrella so that all of my kind of affiliate and shopping content can be in one place, but so that it still feels like it adds value and that it still feels like something you'd be willing to receive, I guess, call it every week or maybe even like once a month, just recapping. Cause I'm not, I'm not pushing products or talking about shopping in every single episode, but it is one of my favorite ways to learn about new products and how people use them is through a podcast. So maybe there's something in there that could be put together. It would also obviously be great to build up more reviews and ratings for the podcast, because I know that people say this all the time, but it really is one of the best ways to help your podcast chart and reach new people is if they do see people are rating and reviewing it. So that is definitely a goal as well. As I kind of talked about earlier in this episode with meeting subscribers and asking for feedback, I really want to continue to kind of build the community of this podcast. And I want there to kind of be some type of community hub. This actually came up in my podcast audit, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, and really thinking about the best place to sort of build a community where we can talk with one another so that, it's not just me talking at you all and being in your AirPods or, being on in your apartment while you're walking around doing laundry. If that's you, definitely DM me and let me know. And if I'm in your AirPods right now, hello. I'm in your AirPods. And then the fifth goal I wrote down, this probably is not surprising, is to monetize eventually. So far in this first year of podcasting, I have made $0 from the podcast. I mean, I haven't tracked like affiliate links and things like that if you guys have been shopping, because it's all tied into my own affiliate platform. But yeah, it would be nice to eventually monetize and have advertisers and do fun, different little partnerships in the world of the podcast. But I am smart enough to know that we are not there yet. And I would not want to monetize prematurely and do something that would annoy listeners and do something that would not add value for brands. So for that reason, I have not forced that. I have not reached out to a single advertiser. I have not looked at anything really in terms of how to monetize, but I do foresee that for later on. So if you're listening to this episode way in the future and there have been ads in this episode, that probably is something that got added in later, because at the time I'm recording this, I wouldn't even know how to put an ad in the podcast. So there's that. Okay. And let me tell you guys about the podcast audit that I had done recently. So Jenny from Podcasting for Moms, I am connected with her on Threads. I follow her there for just tips and things related to podcasting. I can link both her podcast episode that she did with me in the show notes, as well as her account on Threads, because I enjoy following her on there. So if you're also a podcaster, you might like following her too. And she posted on Threads actually, hey, anyone want a free podcast audit? You would just have to be willing to air it as an episode of my podcast. And I was like, sure, okay. So like I said, I will link that episode in the show notes if you want to listen to what she had to say about my podcast. And I think that there's something to be said for building in public, especially right now. It's very low stakes for me to be like, oh, like here are the things that I'm currently struggling with, or here's something that I've been wondering about. And I also have no idea how, like I just told you, I wouldn't know how to put an ad in this podcast, even if someone offered to pay me to do so. All of that to say, I think that it is really fun when people pull back the curtain and let others in on their growth journey, which is obviously the intention of this episode and the intention of me going on to Podcasting for Moms to hear what Jenny had to say about the podcast just from looking at it. One thing that she had to say was that she suggested that I add a photo of myself to the cover, and I will be doing this. I actually took some new branding photos last week, and you will be seeing something new coming soon, which is exciting. She also asked me how I've been promoting the episodes, and I kind of told her everything that I told you. And she also suggested that instead of me just like posting a still image of the episode, like on the podcast account, that maybe I could personally hop on and do a very quick talking to camera video explaining what the episode is about. I think that's a great idea. I know Amy Porterfield does this quite a lot, and I'm pretty sure she actually posts those all as reels so that they live, permanently on her page. So if I could come up with a more thoughtful way for that to be like an evergreen kind of piece of content, I would definitely do that. But even to just hop on and be like, guys, it's Thursday, so that means there's a new episode. Today we're talking all about XYZ. Like, of course, that's going to be more engaging than just what I do right now, which is the phone from Canva with a screenshot of the podcast episode, either in Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Actually, I have a question about that. So, Spotify is where I primarily listen to podcasts just because I have everything in Spotify. So, it's kind of all lumped together. And the last few times I've gone to take the photo of my podcast, instead of my cover, I just see a transcript of like me talking. So I've been having to go to Apple Podcasts to take those little promo photos. I'm just curious if anyone else has seen that and if you know how to turn it off. It's only happening for my podcast, and it's only been happening for like the last 2 episodes. So I'm not really sure what's going on there. She also made a suggestion to add keywords to the title of the podcast and my name to make it more searchable. So actually, check right now as you're listening, if you're listening on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, whatever. I did take her up on this. So I added social media to the title. So I believe now it says create and consume navigating life in the world of social media, or the era of social media, something to that effect. And then next to my name, I added, I think, writer and content creator. So just some additional keywords in my author name and in the title to help get the show out to more people. And then she had also asked me about my description, which had not been edited since the day that I launched the show. So I did update that a little bit to talk more about kind of what you can expect and episodes that I do now that I like had some examples of episodes to add there. I also was asking her about guests because so far this has been a solo podcast, and I think my goal is for the podcast to still primarily be a solo show. So we had a conversation that you can listen to more in depth on her podcast, but she did give me some ideas for like maybe how I can incorporate guests in a mostly solo format so that it's not overwhelming, so that like it's not like there are 3 guest episodes back to back to back and then you get me solo and it feels like kind of strange. So definitely helpful thinking about the cadence and also the type of guests that I would have on the show, because obviously having a guest on your show or being a guest on someone else's show is one of the best ways to grow your own listenership and podcast. So that is obviously something I want to consider, since one of my goals is to grow the listenership of the podcast, but I don't want to give you guys something that you haven't signed up for. So again, if you do have thoughts on guest episodes, please also let me know what they are. And then the last thing we really talked about was this desire that I expressed to build more community with listeners and to give us all kind of a place to connect and chat. And she asked me about, things like Facebook and Facebook groups and Discord. And at the end of the day, I get invited to some stuff like that. I find Facebook groups that don't exist in a very like idealized specific plane of the internet to be really hard to moderate and kind of keep up with as an admin. And I'm just not a Discord user. I avoid Slack at all costs as well, although I do sometimes need to use it for product testing and things like that. All of this to say that I feel like the best place for community building with the podcast is really going to be Instagram. So I would love to use Instagram not just to post the little snippets from each episode, but also to post quotes from episodes or questions or just funny, like cute memes that we can relate to and chat about over there. So I definitely have some ideas for how I might be able to build community through something like Instagram. So go follow the Instagram if you're not already. Also, hopefully more to come there soon. Okay, and then I also wanted to reveal my top 5 episodes from my first year of podcasting. So this actually was a surprise, and like I said, I'm glad I waited until this week to do this and to share this. So the top episode from year 1 is actually an episode I only published 2 weeks ago, which is so crazy. My History of the Met Gala episode is currently my number one episode of the podcast. And obviously, I think this came up in the last week as people were searching for content about the Met Gala. People wanted to learn more about it. And they were thinking of the podcast format when they clearly went to, Spotify, Apple, etc., to type in the word Met Gala and see my episode pop up. So if you found the podcast through that episode, hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. And also, if you haven't gotten a chance yet to listen to the Met Gala recap, that was last week's episode. That one was not as popular. But I think, again, that was because there's so much excitement like leading up to the Met Gala. The Met Gala happened on Monday of last week, and I know I didn't get to recap it till Thursday just because that's when the episode comes out. So hopefully you can understand my scheduling dilemma in that sense. But I do think that was a fun episode just to get a chance to chat about some celebrities and people who I probably don't often talk about on here. So maybe we'll continue to see that episode grow or even get a spike again next year when it's Met Gala season once again. So that means that this next episode, which was my number one for the entire year up until 2 weeks ago, is now the number two episode. And that is the very first one, Why I'm Starting a Podcast. Not surprising if people come to a new show and they have the option to just start from the beginning. I totally get why they would want to do that. So that obviously goes into detail about why I chose to start the show, talking about my content creation journey, and all the things that we've been chatting more about in this episode. And then coming in at number 3 is episode number 2, which is From Print to Digital Media. And that is the basically long of my career journey, how I started out as a print magazine editor and how I have now settled into the role of digital content creator. So really glad you guys liked that one. I was pretty surprised that number 4 is actually our wedding day story, which, I mean, I am a nosy gal. So if anyone is talking about like their wedding or their personal life in any way, I certainly do want to listen in and hear what they have to say about that. So I am really glad you guys enjoyed our wedding day story. It was actually a crazy day, if I do say so myself, obviously for many reasons, but also just because I got to be surrounded by so many friends and family all at once, which is obviously an incredibly special and overwhelming kind of thing. So I am really glad you guys enjoyed that one. And then the 5th top episode for the year was How a Print Magazine Gets Made. So I'm really glad you guys enjoyed hearing more about that. Obviously, when I look at these from a high level, I can see that the magazine industry is still of interest to people, how print magazines got made, and truly this whole evolution that the media industry is going through and that journalism is going through. I have so much more to say about this, of course, too, so I can definitely think of some related episodes. Speaking of that, there is a guest who I would love to have on the podcast if I could potentially persuade her to do so, who could tell you all about the magazine industry. And that's actually my mom, who was also a magazine editor. So, Mom, I know you're listening. If you want to come on the podcast sometime and talk about magazines and how much you love me, I think we can probably coordinate that. So please text me your availability. Okay, bye. To quickly recap, so top 5 episodes: number 1, History of the Met Gala; number 2, Why I'm Starting a Podcast; number 3, From Print to Digital Media; number 4, Our Wedding Day Story; and number 5, How a Print Magazine Gets Made. Now, through pretty much this entire episode, I have been alluding to the fact that I've been doing this myself for a year, and I'm finally here and ready and fully willing to admit that I could use a hand. A helping hand, a friendly extra set of hands, all hands on deck. I am looking for some more hands, specifically 2, ideally both belonging to the same person. I am hiring a part-time, fully remote virtual assistant for the podcast, specifically to help me with the social media marketing aspect that I've been talking about today, and also the recap blog posts for each episode. And I was honestly jotting down a list of what I thought I could use help with regards to hiring a virtual assistant. And there is plenty, actually, that I think I could use help with. But I wanted to make sure that this role felt a little more targeted and focused so that someone who really kind of specializes in these 2 things can jump in and get involved and I am, kind of keeping the door open for this role to hopefully grow and maybe also help me a bit more with podcast production and behind the scenes, like I was talking about, which could include drafting show notes and uploading episodes. But that's going to be for a later time. I really want this role to focus primarily on helping me with my social media presence for the podcast because I suck at managing more than one account. I hate having multiple logins. This is literally always something I've said. I have not had a second account since I was in charge of the Jump Rope and Jump Rope Beauty accounts back when I worked at a startup, which I have a whole episode about working at a startup. I can link in the show notes if this is the first time you're hearing me say that I worked at a startup and you're like, explain that more. Don't worry, there's a whole episode. I'm going to leave the link for the virtual assistant role in the show notes. And from there, you can find the form to apply for the role. And you can also head to createandconsumepodcast.com/hiring to read more about it. But I'll just tell you briefly again, some of the responsibilities that I'm looking for help with in this role will include uploading my YouTube podcast video episodes to Opus AI, which is what I use to help generate those short form video clips, and try to identify like some of the top clips that it spits back out, because it actually gives me, I think, almost 20 clips for every episode. But right now I've just been sharing 2 because that's all I have the bandwidth for. Also scheduling out those short form clips on the Create and Consume Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts accounts, helping me with the process of turning my podcast outlines into blog posts by kind of getting the blog posts formatted and ready for me to review in Squarespace, helping me create some episode promo and things like reel covers and blog graphics using Canva Pro with templates that I'll provide, helping me draft and schedule more engaging captions to promote each episode. Right now, I feel like my captions are extremely basic and the bare minimum effort, and I would love to be a bit more thoughtful with those. And like I mentioned, because I get a transcript of the episode from Riverside, to potentially go through the transcript and find fun takeaways or quotes or things that could be turned into additional content to help promote the podcast. And yeah, as of right now, like I said, this is going to be a part-time, fully remote role. I really think I just need a couple hours a month of additional support. We can chat more about that if you do end up applying for the position, but I would love to, hire someone who listens to the podcast. That would be amazing. So definitely please feel free to check it out or DM me if you have any questions or send me an email. Right now, I am planning to accept applications through the end of next week, which I believe will be May 23rd. And then we'll see what we got from that and we'll go from there. And as far as what you can expect from year 2 of the podcast, obviously more fun episodes, more time spent with me. Also potentially a new home studio. Our lease is up later this year, so we are currently thinking about what to do about that so that we have a place to live. And ideally, in this next place that we live in, there will be some sort of little area, corner, nook, whatever you want to call it, where I can set up a little more a bit of an official podcast recording corner, which would be cool and hopefully make the videos a little more fun. Also, I would love to record some episodes in an actual podcast studio in the city. There are plenty of them out there. If you happen to know any, that would be good. Again, please reach out, let me know. I think I would reserve that pretty much exclusively for recording guest episodes because I'm fully capable now of the at-home one-woman production setup, but I don't want to screw up adding another mic in, and I'd rather just like go somewhere where there's a producer on site and where they have multiple cameras and everything's set up and ready to go so that we can maximize our time actually talking and not have to worry about setup. And once I find the right virtual assistant for the podcast, also obviously that means that the social media accounts will hopefully be thriving. There will be more for you to see there, which should be fun. And as Jenny suggested during our podcast audit, I do definitely want to do a rebrand of the cover art, fix up the website a little bit. So keep an eye out for a little bit of a rebrand coming soon. Okay, and now for the fun part, which is I really want to do a little giveaway just for podcast listeners as a thank you for being with me for this past year, however long you've been here, and for listening to the podcast. So to enter the giveaway, all you have to do is do what I ask you to do at the end of each episode. But this week, there's a special chance at a reward if you do so, which would be to please leave a review of the podcast on the platform of your choice, probably either Spotify or Apple, and then send me a screenshot of your review. You can either DM it to the podcast account, which again is at Create and Consume Pod on Instagram, or if you don't have Instagram or you don't want to do it that way, send me an email to createandconsumepodcast@gmail.com with the screenshot of your review. And please do so by May 23rd. And that will be your entry. And you will be entered to win a $50 gift card, basically to the retailer of your choice. As long as I can, send it to you via email and do it online, I am happy to do so. So think maybe Amazon or Starbucks or Walmart or something along those lines. I feel like these days people just, we all have so many different preferences and priorities when it comes to our shopping. So if you would rather just have like the Amazon gift card to get your groceries or put it towards something practical, totally understand that. If you want it to be for something fun, maybe like a Sephora moment or Ulta or something along those lines, and you just want $50 towards your next beauty purchase, then that's great too. As long as I can purchase the gift card online and share it with you via email, I'm good with whatever you choose. So yeah, send in your entry by May 23rd. And thank you again for taking the time to rate and review the podcast. We've made it to the end of the episode. I have managed to evade any horrible noises from ruining the audio. So thank you guys for being with me for this early morning recording that I'm doing. And for this entire past year, I really do love podcasting, and I'm excited for what year 2 holds with Create and Consume. So as a reminder, you can support Create and Consume for free by doing any of the following. We actually already just chatted about reviews, so feel free to do that and definitely send in an entry to win the gift card for this episode. In addition to that, you can also like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're watching this episode on YouTube. You can follow along at Create and Consume Pod on Instagram and TikTok. You could send this episode to a friend who might enjoy it. And as always, don't forget to check out createandconsumepodcast.com for episode recaps and more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.